Live with CDP Sports Talk, a weekly sports and entertainment podcast sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet. Live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and LinkedIn. And on audio via Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, Anchor FM, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Radio Public, and TuneIn. Now, here's your host, Chris Palme.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Season 8, Episode 3, overall 388 of Live with CDP Sports Talk, sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210. Tell them Chris Palme sent you, or you can email them at info@barrycullen.com. Live with CDP Sports Talk is on radio stations CKRT Border City Radio in Windsor, weeknights from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern, playing the best soft rock music of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And I'm also on radio station WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia, the home of Southern Talk and Sports, from weeknights from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern. I hope everyone's doing well on this Wednesday, April 10th, 2024. It is now playoff time in the Ontario Hockey League, and I'm excited to have my guest on tonight. He used to do the Kitchener Ranger games on Rogers, and now he is the play-by-play announcer for the Ontario Hockey League's Oshawa Generals. His name is Jack Moore, and the Generals just advanced to the second round the other day with a 6-game series win over the Barrie Colts, and we're going to bring on the voice of the Generals right now, Jack Moore. Good evening, Jack. How you doing?
Hey, how you doing, Chris? Thanks for having me.
It's been a while. The last time you came on, I believe it was February 2022.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah, it was. I was still in my first season with Oshawa, and I was still on TV in Kitchener. And there was a lot different things going on at that point. I think I was on CHCH at that point too. So it's been a little while, but I'm happy to see you again.
Same here, and it's exciting times for your former team, the Kitchener Rangers, who defeated Erie in 6 games and winning 3 straight overtime games, and your Generals defeating a very good Barrie team in 6 games and to advance to the second round since 2019.
Yeah, it was big to touch on that Kitchener-Erie series. For Kitchener, missing Trent Swick for the first 3 games of that series. And, Erie was a good team. I only got to see them live twice. They played the Generals tough both times. Oshawa won 6-5 in regulation the first time, and then they won 2-1 in a shootout the second time, which was their only shootout win of the year. So Erie gave Oshawa fits both times they played each other. And then, so I wasn't surprised to see that they were going to give Kitchener some trouble and give them some tough games. I thought that series was going to go 7 when FEMAS tied it late in the third last night, but to get Trent Swick back, and he was a difference maker in game number 5 to give Kitchener that 3-2 series lead and put them in the driver's seat going into last night. And then, it's tough when you have a playoff series that pauses for that long because of the eclipse on Monday and just where Erie is. There was a lot of travel, and there was a lot of people going into the city, so they decided to move the game a night later, and it takes that flow away from the series. And both teams played well, but Kitchener walks away, and Luke Ellenis, a former Barrie Colt prospect, scores the overtime winner for the Kitchener Rangers, and they're able to move on. And Barrie, they were a tough out for the Generals, right? They stood up game number 1 and punched Oshawa in the mouth. Oshawa went into the postseason with a 12-game winning streak. Jacob Oster was the best goalie in the league at that point. Callum Ritchie, Dylan Robrick, Beckett Seneca were playing at a phenomenal pace. And then Barrie, the 8th seed, comes in game 1, and their 4th line right winger, who's still 16, scores the series opening goal in the second period. And you're thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen here? And Barrie gave Oshawa fits the whole series, aside from game number 3, where there was a questionable decision going into the game. I think looking back at it for Colts fans that Marty Williamson elected to go with Ben West instead of Sam Hillebrand, who played really well in games 1 and 2, and then was really the difference maker in game number 5 for the Colts to extend the series to a 6th game with a 47 save shutout. So, the storylines that came out of that series were incredible, a lot more than you would expect from a 1 versus 8. But Oshawa got the job done, and they're able to move on to round 2. And now they have a really tough opponent here in the Ottawa 67s coming up in 2 nights' time.
I just want to do a shout out to Sean Bernard, the voice of the Erie Otters. He was on my show a couple weeks ago, and Erie had a 7-year stretch of no playoffs. So I think it's great for that city and that state to have the team back there. And I think long term, I think the Otters understand Butler are on the right path. And the Kitchener Rangers have had a pretty good season as well. And you know this as well, Jack. There's no gimme games in the Ontario Hockey. I don't care what your record is on any given night, especially in this league, anybody can be beat.
Well, it's junior hockey, right? And I think that's the most important thing to remember with these kids. A lot of them are fighting for draft stock. A lot of them are fighting for contracts. I think it changes a little bit once you get into the playoffs, but in the regular season, there does seem to be a lot of me play instead of we play. And that goes across the Canadian Hockey League and junior hockey, all over the world. It just has that sense to it because guys are playing for their own stock. So yeah, on any given night, it's a team that's a number 1 seed can see a team, this year you had Windsor, Sarnia, Peterborough and Niagara missed the playoffs. You can have a team go into those games and, mismanage and just think it's an open season point night, and all of a sudden they get punched in the mouth and they're down 2-0. So, or, you get up, you're playing well, and we saw it with the Generals back in February when they were in Niagara. They were playing well. They had a lead, and then Niagara just kept chipping away, sent the game into overtime, and then the Ice Dogs won it in overtime. So, it really changes on a night-to-night basis because of that fact that these are 16 to 20-year-old kids. But that's what makes it so exciting to watch, and I think that's why we love watching the World Juniors, because there's that patriotism to it. We want to show our national pride in our teams and these future superstars that are going to come into the NHL. But also there's that sense of we have no clue what's going to happen here on any given game. So that's what makes it so exciting. And I think that's why people love the OHL, is because on any given night, any team can show up on either side.
Yeah, and I'm really excited about this second round. And I know everyone's talking about the Knights. The Knights have had a terrific year. They swept Flint in 4 games, but all of those 4 games, I think 3 out of 4 of them were 1-goal games. So Flint made London earn that 4-game sweep.
Yeah, it was interesting. You thought London was going to go in and they were going to win 6-0 in all 4 games, and they were going to move on. And Easton Cowan was going to have 100 points in the first 4 games of the series, and same with Denver Barkey and Oliver Bonk, and the plethora of talent that they have. But the Firebirds, similar to Barrie, they have a lot of talent there. It's just about, being able to piece it together, and they're a young team that's going to rebuild, right? You got to remember Flint went to the Western Conference Final 2 seasons ago against the Windsor Spitfires. So, this is a team that's kind of on that pendulum swing where they're taking it back, but they're going to come forward and push through here in the next year or so. So that's just the point that they're at, but they got experience for their young guys. And then their older guys, former General Blake Smith on the blue line, had a phenomenal series for Flint. Even though it ended in just 4 games for them, they really showed that, they weren't an easy out, and they made London work. And it's going to be interesting to see how this series between London and Kitchener is going to go in round number 2. I think that's probably the one that's going to draw the most amount of eyes. I mean, you look at every series, there's something to be said for all of them. You have you have 2 division rivalries in the Western Conference. You have 2 division rivalries in the Eastern Conference. You have the Northern rivalry in Sudbury North Bay. You have 2 teams in Sault Ste. Marie and Saginaw who are chasing each other down for a division title all year long. And then you have Oshawa and Ottawa who don't get along, and the 67s have kind of dominated this rivalry over the last few years, including back to 2019 when they swept the Generals in the conference final. So, Oshawa wants to exact a little bit of revenge after going just 4-17 against them in the last 2 seasons, including a 5-game playoff series last year. And then you have that London Kitchener series that's just is going to be bonkers between those two fan bases. I think all of them are going to be great, but I think for the league, having that banner series of London Kitchener is really, really good, and it's going to draw the most amount of eyes to it.
Hey, Jack, before we get to the Generals, I wanted to get your thoughts on the return of the Ontario Hockey League to the city of Brantford for the first time in 40 years with the Brantford Bulldogs.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. That's a division rival for the Generals. Of course, they were the Belleville Bulls. And then back in 2015, they moved to Hamilton. So they stayed in the East Division, and they've now stayed in the East Division on their move to Brantford. I think a lot of people thought that Brantford team was going to be, a little bit of a down year again, kind of in that same spot that they were in last year, that 6th spot. They had a lot of young talent, but were they ready to make that step? And I think they proved a lot of people wrong. They had the lead on the division for most of the year and down the stretch. And if it wasn't for a 12-game win streak at the end of the season, Oshawa probably wouldn't have won the division or the conference in the regular season. So, you got to give your hats off to them. And, that was a really, really tough barn to play in this year. They did a phenomenal job of renovating it and getting it ready for OHL standards. But the people in Brantford showed up, and they made it really, really difficult for opponents. They were loud. They really gave that fun, electric atmosphere even for game 37 of the regular season. There wasn't an easy game played in that building all year. So you got to give the fans credit, and I give the Bulldogs organization credit from Michael Anlauer. I'm friends with Reed Duthie, who does a phenomenal job on the broadcast there in Brantford. Their whole staff has just been incredible, and they have one of the best coaches in the OHL, and Jay McKee behind the bench. And, when you have a guy with that kind of resume, OHL championship coach, and he's leading the charge and doing everything right, you're going to get the best out of your players. So, hats off to everybody involved in that. I thought it was phenomenal. I think Brantford's a great, great, great junior hockey town, especially for the Ontario Hockey League. And I'm really hoping that we see them stick around for a long, long time.
Absolutely. And I'm old enough, by the way, Jack. I remember the Brantford Alexanders, and the city has changed so much. And I think they have more corporate money behind it now. And the OHL has changed as well as a league from the 1980s until now as well. So I'm really hoping, I agree with you, Jack, the Bulldogs stay in Brantford for a long time. I would like to see a team back in Hamilton again at some point once the first Ontario Center is renovated. And as for the Mississauga Steelheads moving to Brampton, I don't know if that's a long-term solution for that market in the GTA.
Yeah, I think Hamilton has a little bit better market presence than Mississauga Brampton will. We'll see what happens. But you got to remember with the Steelheads, they're moving 9 minutes down the road. It's not like they're moving to a new city. It's not like they're generating new fans, like they're within that same market that they already were. So I hope to see a new or different strategy from them to try and draw people in. It sounds like this new lease is a lot more beneficial to the team financially, that hopefully, I don't know the business side of it, of how they're splitting tickets and concessions and all of that stuff. But if the team's able to get a little bit of wiggle room, because the lease is a lot more team friendly in terms of rent, they might be able to comp a few more extra tickets and just get people in the building, because I think that's the most important thing. I think when you go and you talk about the toughest places to play in the OHL and the best places to play in the OHL, it's consistently the markets that have the full buildings. You look at London, one of the toughest places to play. It's a beautiful building. You're playing in front of 10,000 people. Kitchener, you're playing in front of 7,000 people. It's full. It's loud. They're right into it. Oshawa this year did a great job of, averaging close to 5,500 plus. They had their third most attended game in the history of the building for game 68 of the regular season against Sudbury to clinch the Eastern Conference. So there was a lot of things that, when you add that in together, it makes it more difficult for opposing teams to go in and play, especially when, that home team can get the crowd into it early. And it's something that's been lacking for that Mississauga, Brampton market for the last number of years. As for Hamilton, it sounds like at this point it's up to the city on if they want a team. I like the idea of a team, but it sounds like they are leaning into their concert venue, and they're leaning into, potentially trying to bring an American Hockey League team back. And if that's the case, and if they can't get anything to work with an owner who has as deep a pockets as Michael Andlauer and is willing to spend the money on stuff, it's going to be tough for an owner who's not as well off financially to get things to go with the city. So we'll see how much the league wants to work with the city of Hamilton again. Not saying that it won't happen, but I think there's some barriers that have gone up to make it a realistic possibility for an OHL team to return, or have to be a lot of questions answered from the city to the league as to why they should be, a partner and have a team back in the league after what we just saw happen with the Bulldogs.
Totally agree with you there, Jack. One of my friends is a huge General fan, and I wanted to give him a quick shout out. Adam Goss, who's the public address announcer for the Toronto Argonauts, and I saw him the other day. I think he had a picture with you at the Generals game.
Yeah, he did. Adam's great. He's just one of the most energetic and passionate people about, whatever it is that he's doing. And you see it with the Argos, and then you see it with the Oshawa Generals as well. He's there all the time, and he's got a huge crew of friends with him, and they're right into it. I remember there was a game in Brantford, and he was sitting with a Bulldogs fan, and he was the only Generals fan in like 4 sections across, and Oshawa scored to take a 2-0 lead. And I could hear him through my headset and on my crowd mic, and I knew exactly where he was sitting. He's just, one of the best guys in the industry. I love talking to him and love hanging out with him. He always makes it a point to come see me when he's on the road or at home in Oshawa. So he's one of the really, really good guys in the industry. And, I'm happy that things are going well for him. And it's always a blast to see him at the rink.
Absolutely. He does a great job at the Argos games at BMO Field. I do some media work for the Argonauts as well. So I wanted to give Adam a shout out. I know he's a huge Sabres fan too, and I bug him about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was giving it to him a little bit when we were in Barrie about the Sabres, but we're on the same side when it comes to our OHL team, so I think that's where we'll keep our focus for now.
Absolutely. And that leads to my first question, Jack. Just overall quick thoughts on this 23-24 Oshawa Generals regular season and that 12-game winning streak.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the strangest years, because the way it started, you were thinking to yourself, okay, well, what is this team? And, you go back to the offseason, Callum Ritchie has shoulder surgery after tearing his labrum and playing through it for the entirety of last year and through his draft year. So everybody, was wondering, what's wrong with Callum Ritchie? 59 points in 59 games. This kid is supposed to be a lottery pick into the National Hockey League. What's happening with him? And his draft stock falls a little bit. He goes to Colorado at 27 or 28. And then he comes into the summer and, they get the surgery done. They do all the right things. He goes and he dominates at the U18s despite having that shoulder injury. But then there's that rest period, and, the team doesn't want to rush him back afterwards. They want to make sure that he's fully healthy and he can help support the team on a playoff run. And the way the season started, I think Colorado was more thinking, can he come help us at the end of the year on a playoff run, or can he go to the Colorado Eagles and help them on a playoff run if Oshawa's season ends early? But then right around the time that Cal came back into the lineup, the team acquired Connor Lockhart from the Peterborough Petes, who was just the odd overager out. They had 4 on the roster, so they needed to move one out. And when you have a chance to get a guy who went 3rd overall in the OHL draft and a 6th-round pick of Vancouver, he didn't sign, so he's a free agent when it comes to his NHL rights. But when you bring a guy who has that championship-level experience into the locker room, he can really help teach and coach guys. And there was a big dramatic change in the way the team played when you add in an NHL 1st-round pick, an NHL 6th-round pick, and an overager who's won a championship. All of a sudden things changed. Luke Torrance broke his hand at the beginning of the year too, the day before game 1 of the season, missed the first 5 weeks, comes back in. I think he had 15 points in the first 11 games that he was back. He turned into one of the best penalty killers in the Ontario Hockey League. The coaches poll had him rated as one of the most underrated players in the Eastern Conference. So when you get those three guys coming into the lineup at the same time, it's not really a surprise to see things change. But there was a clear change in the mindset of the team and how they were going to go about their game. And they changed their system a little bit. They're going to wear you down defensively. They're going to keep you in the corners. They're going to block shots. They're going to be physical. They're going to let Jacob Oster see every puck that comes to the net to help him make the best save possible. They're going to go down the ice. They're going to dump it in. They're going to chase it down. They're going to check you, and then they're going to maintain possession. So all of those things added up to what ended up being a phenomenal end to the regular season, winning 32 of the last 43 games or something along those lines. The team was just incredible once you left that first 25 game stretch of the season. So, it was really, really fun to see them go into that. And you talk about that 12 game winning streak. At the beginning of that winning streak, they had a 3-game stretch. On a Wednesday night, they were in London. On a Friday night, they were in Sault Ste. Marie. And on a Saturday night, they were in Sudbury. And they walked out of those 3 games with a 3-0 record, a 6-4 win over London, a 4-3 overtime win, which was their first comeback win of the year. They were trailing going into the third. They won it in overtime. First time they had won a game when trailing going into the third all season long. They also played their backup goaltender in that game for just his 8th start of his OHL career. And then in Sudbury, they turned around and dominated one of the most offensively gifted teams in the league by a final score of 6-2. So you look at all those things and say, wow, this team can really compete with the top level teams. And then they didn't lose the rest of the regular season after that. They won another 8 games or so from that point on. And it was really magical to see how the city responded to them, how they showed up for home games to cheer them on down the stretch. But then also how the team responded and kind of changed from that, we're probably going to be a 6, 7, 8 seed in the playoffs and have a daunting first round task to, hey, we're one of the big guns and we swing the big stick in this conference, and teams should be scared of us more than we're scared of them. And to watch it happen in live time, I don't think I fully comprehended it yet. It hasn't really settled in, but that change from the first half of the season or the first third of the season to the second and third thirds of the season was just phenomenal.
What was the turning point in the season? Do you find it was that 3-game road trip to London, Sault Ste. Marie? And I'm trying to remember the other team, but it was tough games.
Sudbury, yeah, those tough ones. That was the start of the 12-game win streak to finish the year. What turned this season around was a road trip to Windsor and Sarnia. The team had just come off 5 straight losses. 3 of them, I believe, were in overtime. That might have happened later in the year. But they had just come off 5 straight losses, and they were 9-12, 3-1, and things were looking really, really bleak. Like, you were worried about, some guys, getting traded because they were just going to be valuable assets to move on. You were worried about everything. Like, everything was on the table at that point. It was tough to go to those games and not think about the bigger picture beyond the hockey. And the team went to Windsor. I forget the final score of the game, but it was never really out of reach. They kind of had that get-right game against the worst team in the Western Conference, who was playing really, really bad hockey at that point. And then they turned around in Sarnia, and again, Noah Bender, who's a Waterloo native, played junior C hockey last year as a 16-year-old. He makes the OHL as a 17-year-old. He doesn't get a ton of playing time. He had 2 starts to begin his career where he lost 7-1 to Barrie and he lost 4-1 to Ottawa. And you were sitting there really worried when he got the start in Sarnia, like, how is this one going to go? And he turns around with a phenomenal performance. They won 4-1 against the Sting, and then they won 3 more going into that Christmas break. And I think that was just like the confidence boost. And then the guys got a little bit of a layoff. They were slow coming back from Christmas. They had a 1-goal loss to Brantford. They beat North Bay in overtime in North Bay on New Year's Eve, but then a 1-0 loss to Sault Ste. Marie and a 3-2 loss to Kitchener in there. And it was, okay, what is this team going to be? Where are we going to end up here? And then they turned it around and everything was kind of gravy from that point. So they were phenomenal down the stretch. They really bought into what the coaches were selling to them, and they brought in some help on the back end. Connor Punnett coming in, Zachary Sandu coming in at the trade deadline. Sandu, a former Guelph Storm, left-handed shot defenseman, fits in perfectly on that third pair. Connor Punnett, just one of the most electrifying defensemen in the OHL, coming from the Barrie Colts, and it really just made a difference and changed the way that Oshawa could play the game because they could commit to that defensive hockey. But then when they got to the offensive end, Sandu and Punnett could contribute offensively as well.
Speaking of Sandu, you guys have had some luck with some golf players in Sandu, who I always liked as a Storm, and Jacob Oster as well. And I thought he took some unfair criticism in golf because there was times where he looked good. But I wanted to ask you this later, Jack, but I'm going to ask you this now. What is the difference between Jacob Oster now than when he was acquired in January 23 by the Generals from the Guelph Storm for Patrick Lever?
You know what? It's interesting because when that trade happened, I think the first 4 games he allowed like 4 goals and he had a shutout in that stretch. And you looked at him and you said, wow, this kid is phenomenal. And then it started to fall off. Oshawa didn't have the best roster. They weren't the most competitive team. They had a lot of injuries on the back end. I think they had 3 16-year-olds every night on defense down the stretch of the season. Their oldest defenseman was 19, and they only had one 19-year-old defenseman, and then they had an 18-year-old defenseman. So it was really an uphill battle last year from outside of the crease, and then I think it was just Jacob getting that confidence and making sure that he was comfortable and making every save, and he wasn't second guessing himself at all. And I think there were some plays that he'd want to have back last year, and everybody knew that this summer was going to be the most important thing. And I think one of the biggest things for him is he got a chance to go to LA Kings development camp. And I think under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have made it past the rookie camp. But because LA played in Australia this year, they had to take their 25-man team to Australia, but they had to leave a 40-man camp back in Los Angeles. So Jacob actually got to stay and compete and work every day with professionals, American leaguers, NHLers who were back in Los Angeles and didn't make the trip to Australia. So he got to learn a little bit more, maybe pick up some extra things. I think he came back with a lot of confidence that he could be one of the best goaltenders in the OHL this year. And he didn't have the best start to the season, but once everything clicked for him, he finished the year incredibly strong. And you look at his last 4 games of the playoffs, I would argue he'd probably want games 1 and 2 back. They weren't his best. But games 3 through 6, he had a 154 goals against a 118 goals against and a 954 save percentage. So I think it's the confidence. I think he changed up some of his routines in the summer and how he trains and what he does. And it all seems to be clicking. And I think he has that really good rapport with his defense, who are playing really well in front of him as well.
And the word I wanted to use too, Jack, is consistency. When he was in Guelph, there was times where he looked like a top goalie, especially against teams like the London Knights. And then there was times where he just looked off on obviously his confidence. So for me, it's his confidence and being consistent.
Yeah, and you know what? That happens in junior hockey too. There's a lot of streaky players. I think the big thing for Jacob is he's kind of condensed that window of his consistency. So instead of having a game where, he's a 930 save percentage and he only allowed 3 goals against London, and that's kind of his ceiling. And then, the downside was, a low 800 save percentage performance. I think now we've gotten to a point with Jacob where when he's off, he has an 875 save percentage. And then when he's on, he's unstoppable, or he's unbeatable, I should say. So I think that's the biggest thing, is he's just elevated his floor, which has also elevated his ceiling. So the consistency, I think you'd always like to be there a little bit more. It's going to happen. He played 60 games in the regular season. He's played the first 6 of the playoffs so far. But when you can kind of minimalize those mistakes and make them a lot less difficult to come back from, I think that's the big difference. So yes, the consistency, but he's not he's not costing the team games on the other side, which I think there were a couple games last year where a goaltending performance could have made the difference between a win and a loss, but you can say that every night. So I think for him, it's just that consistency of having his floor as high as possible, and he's really elevated that level of his game this year.
And that goes to the whole team. That affects the defense and the forwards, knowing that, hey, if we get off to a slow start, Jacob will keep us in this game until we get our legs going.
I think one of the things for me is there's the confidence that Jacob's going to do his job. So when you see 2-on-1s against Oshawa, defensemen have no problem giving you a lane to skate to the net. I'm going to take away the pass. Shoot the puck all you want. He's going to stop it. I'm not going to give you the backdoor play where he doesn't have a chance to make a save. So I think, depending on who's in the net, depending on the team, that aspect might change it. Even on the penalty kill too, I think it's something similar. Oshawa had one of the best penalty kills in the regular season and now through the beginning of the playoffs. And I think it's because there's, that commitment to it on the team side. Luke Torrance is the best penalty killer in the OHL that's still playing in the playoffs. But also you have that aspect of, I can cheat a little bit to help save the team and make a play on the puck here because I know that I have the confidence for Jacob to do his job on the back end. So I think that is part of it too, is that there's a confidence and a mutual respect both ways for the team. And it's worked at this point, and now they have a tough task doing it against Ottawa in a 7-game series.
Absolutely. Do you have time just for a few more minutes? A couple more quick questions?
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, Jack, I wanted to ask you this overall assessment on the job that head coach Derek Laxdell and the assistant coaches did with this team, and also with the general manager Roger Hunt putting this roster together.
Well, I think I got to be careful here. I've got a good relationship with Derek Laxdell, so I won't talk too badly about him. Okay. No, he is like from day one. When I've seen him operate, it's a little different now. I get to see coaches behind the scenes a little bit more in my role now than I did when I was on TV in Kitchener. I did a couple games for Guelph a few years ago when I was in Hamilton. You just didn't communicate with them as frequently as you do when you're on the road, on the bus, in the hotel with the team constantly. But everything that I've seen like this, I was a little worried when Derek came over at the beginning of last year, and he was an assistant coach in the National Hockey League. And I was like, this guy's going to come in. He's going to think he's an NHL big shot, and then it just might not work. And then watching him operate, this might be one of the best coaches I've ever seen work behind the scenes. The attention to detail, the ability to adapt based on the kid he's talking to. I think a lot of people forget that he won a Memorial Cup with the Edmonton Oil Kings back in 2014. Sorry for your viewers in Guelph for bringing that one up. But he was the first coach in WHL history to have 3 consecutive 50-win seasons. So, he had that resume and that massive resume. He went to Texas in the American League, and he lost Game 7 of the Calder Cup, which if you're a coach at that point, there's not really much you can do in a Game 7. You can just roll the lines and hope it goes in your favor. And Texas was right in that game until about midway through the third period when Toronto ran away with it. And then he goes up and he coaches the Dallas Stars, and they go to a Stanley Cup final, him as an assistant coach for Rick Bowness. And then you watch him operate behind the scenes and you say, wow, yeah, I understand why his teams always have success. It's because he's a really good coach. He's really good at breaking down the video. His motivational tactics are really good. The rapport that he has with the kids, and then how he operates and treats his staff and the business staff and the people who are around the team, it's second to none. And same can be said for Steve O'Rourke, who's now in his second year with the team as an assistant coach. He takes care of the defensemen, but just one of the really, really good hockey minds that I've ever met, and his ability to break down video and talk players through and kind of change the language a little bit to help and guide them is phenomenal. I truly think that this Oshawa coaching staff gets the most out of their players, which is incredible at the junior level to have guys who can pull the best out of these guys on every given night. And then you talked about Roger Hunt. I mean, I don't know if there's a better general manager in the OHL right now. You look at the construction of this team. Stuart Roloffs was acquired as an 18-year-old for a third and a fifth. He led the team in goals this year. He was the team captain in his overage season. Connor Lockhart was acquired for a third and a sixth, and he's one of the most impactful players on the team. You look at Dylan Robrick, acquired for an 8th-round pick from Niagara. He turns around his first year in Oshawa. He's a 53-point player. He gets drafted in the 6th round by the New York Rangers, turns around the next year as a 19-year-old and has a 70-point season. And he hasn't missed a game as a member of the Oshawa Generals either. Zachary Sandu, the Connor Punnett trade goes back to a goaltender who never actually played for Oshawa, Matthew Spraka. He was a goaltending prospect for the Generals, got traded 1-for-1 to the Barrie Colts for Thomas Stewart. Thomas Stewart comes in. He was a junior A guy in 2019 as a 16-year-old, starts on the Generals' third pairing, works his way up. He becomes an assistant captain. He's a leader of the team. He's on the team this year as an overager. He gets traded back to Barrie with a couple picks, and Connor Punnett comes the other way. And this is a guy who just signed an NHL contract with the Dallas Stars. So you look at, in terms of roster construction, you mentioned Jacob Oster 1-for-1 with Patrick Lever, who I love Patrick Lever as a person, but he was playing in the QMJHL this year, and Guelph didn't get to use him after this season. Jacob Oster should be winning the OHL Goaltender of the Year award when that gets announced. So when you look at roster construction and trades, I don't think that anybody can really beat what Roger Hunt has done. Luca Morelli was a 5th-round pick in this league. He's going to go in the top 3 rounds of the NHL draft. Luke Torrance, I mentioned him. He's best penalty killer in the OHL. He was a 40-point guy, 21 goals this year. He was an 11th-round pick. So the job that Roger Hunt and his staff have done in terms of scouting, both at the minor hockey level, but in the Ontario Hockey League as a whole, to find those diamond in the rough type of players and bring them in and be key contributors for the Generals. Again, I'd like to see a team that does it as well as Roger Hunt has over the last number of years, because the Generals consistently are able to build rosters with guys that other teams have given up on. Luca D'Amato for Blake Smith was another great trade. Blake Smith, phenomenal defenseman, but Luca D'Amato just adds that different element, and he, is the playoff veteran on this team. He played 20 or 19 playoff games in 2022 for the Flint Firebirds, and you can't teach that. You have to experience it. So to have a guy like that on the roster, is really a hat tip to Derek Laxdal and Roger Hunt and the job that this whole staff for the Generals has done building this roster and coaching them to this point.
And that's how teams win on a consistent basis in the Ontario Hockey League, is also stability and consistency. Because when you switch GMs and coaches all the time, that's hard on the players as well. And it looks like Oshawa is set up for success for many more years going into the future.
Yeah, it really does. It was funny coming into this year. This was the build year, and then next year was going to be the go for it year. And I think the 2022 Windsor Spitfires will attest to when you have the opportunity to win, you got to go and win, because the 2023 Windsor Spitfires got swept in the first round of the playoffs as the 1 seed to the Kitchener Rangers. So, when you have that opportunity to go for it and get it done, you have to take advantage of it. But I think there is still a lot of excitement about what this team's going to be able to do heading into next year with the key pieces that you expect to return from this roster. Oshawa is the 6th youngest roster in the OHL. You have to remember that Niagara, Peterborough, Windsor, Sarnia, and Barrie are the only teams that are younger than Oshawa at this point. So for the Generals to get the experience of winning in the first round and carry that over, it's going to help them the rest of this playoffs, but hopefully for Oshawa, it's going to help them next year as well.
Absolutely. And we'll wrap it up with this question, Jack. What is your assessment of the upcoming series against the Ottawa 67s, who defeated Brantford in the first round in 6 games? And who are some key players to watch out for on Ottawa in this series?
Yeah, Ottawa, you want to talk about a team that's well coached. Dave Cameron does a phenomenal job in the nation's capital with that team. A real commitment to defensive hockey, wear you down, good goaltending, always churns out a really good goaltender. Right now it's Colin McKenzie, but before it was Max Donoso taking over from Will Cranley, who took over from Mikey DiPietro. Like just a constant rotation of great goaltending coming out of that organization has been great. You talk about stability, James Boyd in at general manager, and Dave Cameron, who's now in his third season as the head coach of the 67s. So they've done a really good job organizationally, and they draft really well. They have some great players, and I think, for me, it starts and stops with their captain, Luca Pinelli. He's just one of the best firecrackers in the OHL. He can score at will. He's one of the best pure goal scorers in the Ontario Hockey League. I put him about 4th or 5th in the OHL in terms of best goal scorer. And I think for Ottawa, it's going to, really come down to, are you going to get the most out of your forwards? And really, you looked at Ottawa in the regular season, they were a team who was struggling to score, but they had a 40 goal scorer on the team with Luca Pinelli. Like they were not great at putting the puck in the back of the net, but they made some key trades at the deadline. Braden Kressler, a Toronto Maple Leafs prospect, is a guy to watch. They have a really, really talented blue line. Henry Muse and Frankie Morelli are both going to be NHL draft picks this year, but then you look at Thomas Sermon, you have Matthew Mayich in there, who's going to be suspended for the first 2 games. Derek Smythe, who's a really strong defenseman back there. Just overall roster construction, they're really solid top to bottom, especially from the back out. So I think it's going to be a wear you down series. I don't think we're going to get 6 or 7 games of 5-4, 6-5, 7-4 type of games. I think we're going to get a lot of 3-2, 4-3, 2-1, wear you down. And physical battles between these two teams. Ottawa took 6 of 8 games in the regular season. So I think, and that's primarily how those games went. So I think that's how this whole series is going to go. And it's going to be a question of if Oshawa can step up and answer the bell this time around, because I know they're tired of hearing that they lost to the 67s.
How important is having that home ice in this series, in your opinion?
I mean, with the way that Jens Nation has showed up at the Tribute Community Center, it's massive. And I think it's important for Oshawa to get the crowd into the game as soon as possible. Oshawa scored the first goal in the first 6 games of the playoffs just twice, and only once at home. And that one time they did it at home, they won the game. So getting the crowd into it early is going to be super, super important here for the Generals in this series. They're going to have 6,000 plus people every night screaming their heads off, trying to help them will their way to a win against the 67s. So to have that advantage over Ottawa in this round, I think is going to be huge. And then, when you get into the chess match of the series between the coaches, being able to have that last change, in really the games that flip the series and games 5 and game 7 when you get a little later on, but also in the first 2 games of the series where you can really set the tone. I think that's going to benefit Oshawa. And I think we're going to see a really good, not only battle on the ice, but a battle of minds behind the benches between these 2 coaches.
I think it's going to be a long series. And just quickly, the other 3 series, how do you see North Bay, Sudbury, London, Kitchener, and quickly Sioux and Saginaw? And I think that Sioux Saginaw series is going to go 7.
I think that Sioux Saginaw series has the chance to be the most explosive. I think that one's going to be the one where you're going to see a lot of, the 6-5 games, 6-4, 5-4. I think that's the series that you're going to look at to get that out of. But I think, London, Kitchener, as a former Kitchener guy, I hate to say this, I like London in 6. I just think they're built a little bit better than Kitchener is at this point. I like their roster. Now, it's going to depend on that third line for the Knights. If they have to run their top 2 lines 30 minutes a game, it's going to be tough sledding for London. But if that third line, and more specifically, Caleb Lawrence can carry a big load in this series, I think London's going to have a really good chance to win this series. They're just so good on the blue line. Their top 4 is better than anybody in the Canadian Hockey League at this point. And their top 6 can put up 6 goals on their own, each one of them, at any point. So if that third line can get in offensively, eat some minutes for them, be massive on the penalty kill. I think that's going to be important. I like London in 6. The Sioux Saginaw series, I think you're right. I think it's going 6 or 7 games. I'm still going to edge to Saginaw as the Memorial Cup host and having a home ice advantage in that one. And then the other Eastern Conference series, I think this is where Sudbury really has to make the statement on whether they're going to be a team to be reckoned with in this postseason, because North Bay is a shutdown defensive team. Paul Christopoulos, one of the best defensive defensemen in the OHL, but North Bay can score. So Sudbury, isn't matching up against the team that struggles to score offensively like Mississauga does at points. North Bay can score just as well as Sudbury can, but they're also one of the better defensive teams in the OHL. And if they get, I think the big question for them, do they get Anthony Romani back, who is one of the best point getters in the OHL this year and one of the best goal scorers in the OHL this year? And do they get Dom DiVincentis back? If the answer is yes to both of those, I like North Bay in 6 games, 7 games in that series. And then I'm going to say Oshawa is going to win in 3 because they're I think that's just the way that series is going to go. But we're going to have fun. I think this is going to be a long series between Oshawa and Ottawa, and it's going to be a pleasure to call it every other night here for the next week and a half. And hopefully it's ringing the bell into Oshawa going to their first conference final since 2019 when they got swept by Ottawa. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be great hockey. I think everybody should tune in and support this, because this playoff run is going to be really special for all these 8 teams and whoever gets to move on to their respective conference finals.
I have Oshawa over Ottawa in 6, Sudbury over North Bay in 6, London over Kitchener in 5, but I think there's going to be a couple of games that go to overtime. And Saginaw and the Sioux, I got to go with the Spirit in 7 games, and I'm looking forward to the second round, and I think there's going to be a lot of overtime games, and I'm really just appreciative you coming on tonight, Jack, and giving us some times. And finally, where can my audience follow you on social media? And when is your next Generals broadcast on the air?
Yeah, your audience can follow me at Madjack54, MADJACK54 on Twitter, X, and Instagram. And then my next Generals broadcast Friday night, game 1, 7:30 p.m. From the Tribute Community Center in Oshawa. Should be a packed house. I haven't looked at the ticket map yet, but I've been told this week that there's already over 5,600 tickets sold for game number 1. So that's close to capacity at 6,100. So it's going to be loud. It's going to be fun. And you can listen to those games at MixLR, MixLR.com/Oshawa Generals.
And do you have a color analyst, or do you do the game solo?
No, I do the games by myself. There have been games this year where I have color commentators. I did have a pretty reliable one last year who did about 5 or 6 games for me. But, when your name's Victor Finley and you get called by the Montreal Canadiens to be the new radio play-by-play man, you're probably going to take that. And, hopefully Oshawa gets to see him. He'll be calling the OHL final on TSN. So hopefully the Generals will get to see him sometime soon. But I do the games by myself.
All right. Well, Jack, I want you to save your voice. I want to say thank you so much for coming on live with CDP Sports Talk here on WQEE 99.1 FM and CKRT Border City Radio in Windsor. Continued success in your career, and good luck to you and the Oshawa Generals this Friday night, 7:35 against Ottawa 67s.
Thanks so much, Chris. Much appreciate it. And I'm hoping for another big season for the Argos this summer.
Hopefully we'll get to see you down at BMO Field at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely on my list for this summer, is to get to as many Argos home games as I can.
Go Argos and go Gens. Good luck.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Jack. All right, guys, that was Jack Moore, the play-by-play announcer for the Ontario Hockey League's Oshawa Generals. He also used to call the games for the Kitchener Rangers on Rogers TV. And Oshawa and Ottawa start their second round series this Friday night at 7:35 face-off in Oshawa. And again, I've got Oshawa over Ottawa in 6 in the East, Sudbury over North Bay in 6 games in the East, second round. And in the West, I've got London in 5 over the Kitchener Rangers, but don't count the Kitchener Rangers out, especially when they win in overtime, 3 straight wins in overtime. And then Saginaw against the Sioux. I think this might be the best matchup in the second round of the Ontario Hockey League playoffs. I still got to go with the Saginaw Spirit in 7 games over a very good Sault Ste. Marie team as well. Before we wrap this show up, guys, I'm just going to play a little clip courtesy of the Ontario Hockey League's YouTube channel of the Game 6 against Oshawa and Barrie, where Oshawa defeated Barrie to advance to the second round. And I'm just going to play the clip right now, courtesy again of the Ontario Hockey League.
Blocked by Aitchison. D'Amato takes the shot in front. That looked like it may have gone off Ritchie, and then Robrick, a big hit on Beaudouin. D'Amato, his shot scores! Luca D'Amato puts it on goal, and that fine
to change direction and watch, just as simple. I think that hits some.
Torrance leaves it in the corner. Seneca will collect it. Danford at the line, takes the shot in front. Torrance scores! Parked on the doorstep, Luke Torrance.
One. Watch Danford just spots Torrance all alone.
Line, and Robrick ahead to Ritchie, 2-on-1. Ritchie behind the back to Robrick, stopped by Hillebrandt. What a play and what a save by Sam Hillebrandt.
You got Callum Ritchie coming in, a nice little backhand pass to Robrick, but
turned over. Here's a chance shot. What a save by Jacob Oster as he flashes the leather.
Watch here, Grizzoli is going to walk right in the slot. He's got that corner picked, but they poured their hearts out here in this opening round series, and going to go and what a season for the Ontario Colts. But credit the Oshawa Generals. They get the loss on home ice, but they come right back to Barrie and end up winning the playoffs. And you can see the big hugs now as Connor Punnett goes through that line. So many friends, so many familiar faces.
You know, this is a great tradition in hockey when you can.
That clip was courtesy of the Ontario Hockey League's YouTube channel. A tremendous series by the Barrie Colts, forcing Oshawa to 6 games. And like I said, this second round of the OHL playoffs is going to be exciting, and I'm looking forward to it as well. Speaking of exciting, guys, the next Live with CDP Sports Talk, sponsored by BarryCullen.com, is going to be Monday, April 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern. My special guest is Liz Boss. She is the general manager and a wrestler with Best Entertainment Wrestling out of Saskatchewan. So we're going to talk to her about starting up a wrestling company, BEW, Best Entertainment Wrestling, and talk about how she got into the world of professional wrestling, and as being a general manager as well. So I hope you guys can tune in to Live with CDP Sports Talk, Season 8, Episode 4 on Monday, April 15th, 4 p.m. Again, Liz Boss, the GM and wrestler with Best Entertainment Wrestling out of Saskatchewan. So if you're a wrestling fan, tune in to Live with CDP Sports Talk this Monday at 4 o'clock. Live with CDP Sports and Entertainment Talk Show is available now on CKRT Border City Radio in Windsor, Ontario, weeknights from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern. You can check out our website at ckrtbordercityradio.com. Also, if you're looking for your forever furry friend, please check out the Cambridge and District Humane Society at 1650 Dunbar Road in Cambridge, Ontario. You can call them at 519-623-7722, or you can visit their website at cambridgehumanesociety.org. And all their pets, cats, dogs, bunnies are up there for adoption. And they're also doing a once-a-month 50-50 raffle, and you can get tickets through cambridgehumanesociety.org. And it's a great place to volunteer, as I do some dog walking for them as well. And there's one dog I specifically really like, and I wish I could adopt him. His name is Clifford, and check him out on their website as well. He's a big, sucky baby, but he's a wonderful dog. So again, check out the Cambridge District Humane Society. Also, guys, as always, Live with CDP Sports Talk is also a weekly sports and entertainment talk show hosted by yours truly, Chris Pame. It is also on weeknights at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern on radio station WQEE 99.1 FM, The Key, the home of Southern sports and talk, the heartbeat of Atlanta. Our radio station's website is wqeefm.radio12345.com. Live with CDP Sports Talk is live streamed on these platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter /X, Twitch, LinkedIn, and now available on Instagram. You can follow me there at Chris Pame on Instagram. And I'm also on Threads, Chris Pame on Threads as well. Also, you can check out my website at beacons.ai/Chris D. Pame. Everything you need to know about me on digital media and on the internet is on beacons.ai/Chris D. Pame. Live with CDP Sports Talk, again, is sponsored by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership at 905 Woodlawn Road West in the Guelph Auto Mall. Check out barrycullen.com for the newest selection of new and pre-owned GM vehicles, or give them a call at 519-824-0210, or email them at info@barrycullen.com. And speaking of Barry Cullen Chevrolet right now, it's truck month there. 0% financing for up to 60 months, or up to $10,000 off a select Silverado or 1500 crew cab pickup truck. More details at barrycullen.com. Also, guys, I am a TikTok content creator. Check me out there at Live with CDP. And I want to say thank you to my 2,000 plus followers on TikTok. Again, check me out there at Live with CDP and make sure you hit that follow notification. StreamYard is the official live stream provider of Live with CDP Sports Talk. If you're into webinars or podcasting, such as yours truly, check out StreamYard.com. They have basic free plans, or they have professional plans like I have for $49 US a month. And if you're a business that does a lot of live streaming, podcasting, webinars, check out StreamYard.com and contact the sales department for pricing on businesses as well. Live with CDP Sports Talk, the audio version is available on these platforms: iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Spotify for podcasters, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Castbox, LinkedIn, Pandora, and Tuned In. Finally, you guys can email or text Live with CDP Sports Talk at cpame19@gmail.com, or text the show at 519-820-7188. Any comments, questions, suggestions, feedback would be greatly appreciated. And I want to say thank you to everyone watching this live stream tonight and also on my audio platforms. And thank you again to WQEE 99.1 FM and CKRT Border City Radio in Windsor for airing Live with CDP Sports Talk. And again, I hope you guys can check out my next show this Monday, April 15th at 4 p.m. with my guest, Liz Boss, a.k.a. her ring name, Sarah O'Connell, who is a GM and wrestler with Best Entertainment Wrestling out of Saskatchewan. And I have another special guest coming on next week, and more details will follow on my social media as well. Again, thank you to Jack Moore, the radio play-by-play announcer for the Ontario Hockey League's Oshawa Generals, for coming on here. And again, thank you everyone for watching, and I hope everybody has a great night. And we'll see you back here on Monday, April 15th at 4 o'clock to talk a little wrestling with Liz Boss, a.k.a. Sarah O'Connor, from Best Entertainment Wrestling out of Saskatchewan. Hope everybody has a great night, great weekend. I am off to Buffalo this weekend to cover 2 Buffalo Bisons games as freelance independent media, and also cover the Buffalo Bandits National Lacrosse League regular season home opener finisher. Sorry, the Buffalo Bandits last regular season home game of the year in the regular season against the Calgary Roughnecks. So check out my social media this weekend for pictures, videos, and some player and coaches interviews from the Bisons games and the Buffalo Bandits. And a thank you to the Buffalo Bandits and Buffalo Bisons organizations for these freelance media opportunities as well. I hope everybody has a great night, great weekend, and we'll see you back here for Live with CDP Sports Talk this Monday at 4 o'clock. Thanks again for watching and listening to Live with CDP Sports Talk, brought to you by Barry Cullen Chevrolet Dealership here in Guelph.